Secretary General, I want to focus on the issue of community employment. I suppose the principal purpose of community employment is to provide training opportunities for job activation to ensure people come off the live register and are able to secure their way back into employment. Would that be a fair assessment of the CE scheme?
Well, it's twofold things. It's both about activation, but it's also about local service delivery. And there are and it's providing occupational activity for people in providing local services that they mightn't otherwise get because they're very distant.
But it is a principal funding that's the department responsibility for funding that. Your mechanism with it, your scope within that is focused on the job activation side.
Well, it's both, mainly
they often don't receive funding from any other department towards that very positive work that they do. The funding comes from the Department of Social Protection, and it's a job activation measure.
It's both, as I said, it's both community and job activation. And there was a review of community employment a number of years ago, which the department did, which very clearly made that point.
No, I accept that that's what it is on the ground. But from a funding perspective, the people on the scheme are employed a rate slightly above the social welfare rate to encourage them to participate in it.
Right.
And the two posts, the CE supervisor or the assistant supervisor, are paid to manage those employees. There's no additional funding for all of the positive stuff that you talk about.
They're all welfare recipients. And we do provide payments in terms of training grants and so on. So
again, training for the people on the scheme.
And materials and so on.
It's one of the flaws of the scheme is that all of the funding relates to the unemployment or the employment or the activation element, and there isn't significant funding for those other measures that you just referenced, that positive community contribution. So with that in mind, we have people who are in charge of those schemes, managing those schemes, budgeting and so on, who are community employment supervisors. They haven't received an increase in pay since 2008. Would you accept that?
Yes.
Yeah. Do you think that's acceptable?
There's a claim in, Deputy, and we're talking to our colleagues in the Department of Public Expenditure and Reform about that. Just to give you a bit of context, prior to 2008, their pay did move with the public sector generally, even though they're not public sector employees. In 2008, at the time of the FMP cuts, they made an argument that they shouldn't be treated like public sector, their pay shouldn't be cut. So public servants had their pay cut, and community employment people didn't.
But even if you take even if you take that case, a telephonist, a clerical officer, even those people based on 2008 HSE consolidated grades, for example, public servants are now between 3 and 5% above where they were in 2008.
And I agree.
The minimum wage, for example, Mr. McKeown, has increased by 30% since 2008.
I don't disagree with what you're saying, Deputy. I suppose the point I was making is that, unfortunately, that breach which was created in 2008 has created a situation now where they need to make a separate claim to their employer.
Is there a reason why the National Wage Agreement was not applied to them?
Because they chose to step out of it in 2008, Deputy. And so that's now...
But am I correct in saying that the department could have included them in that agreement?
No, they're not. At this point in time, Deputy, they made the argument very clearly that they are not public servants, that they are private employees.
But we know why they're not public servants, because they don't have the pension entitlement that many public servants have. Would that be fair?
No, they don't, but that's a separate issue that we've addressed separately, Deputy. But the main reason, sorry, and I don't want to be difficult here, but the main reason is that they are now employed and they are treated as employees of private limited companies. There is the public sector pay deal doesn't encompass.
Do you accept that they are employed by private limited companies?
They are, and they need to make a pay claim to those companies.
Well, Mr. McKeown, is it not the case that those private limited companies were specifically established to devolve the department of their responsibility to have them as employees?
Well, sorry, Deputy, these were set up a long time ago, so I can't talk about the genesis of them, but my understanding is that they
absolved the department of any responsibility towards those people.
No, definitely. I think we will respond to a request from the companies for funding if they need funding to pay their staff. And we're talking
the difficulty is, Mr. McKeown, we have limited companies that often have 2 or 3 or 4 volunteers on it, okay? They have no mechanism to fund that scheme other than the provision of the CE scheme. If they paid their employees more, the department would step in and stop them from trading recklessly, right? So the department effectively acts as a shadow director for many CE schemes.
No, that's not the case, Deputy. I think, to be clear, it's a matter for the CE schemes to make a case for funding to the department. If that funding is required...
But Mr. McKeown, the governance is so poor in so many CE schemes that the CE supervisor is the one that largely runs the CE scheme with the assistance of people who are willing to put their name to a board.
And that is a difficulty, Deputy, the governance of CE schemes, which you spoke about, which is a problem. And, you know, we would have concerns in some cases, and we've had, for example, cases where we've had to get the guards involved in issues on CE schemes. So there is a whole context to this. But what the current situation is that there is a pay claim, as I understand it, in being. It is a matter for the CE sponsors to come to the department and look for funding in relation to that pay claim. And if that approach is made, we'll consider it. And we've already
The problem
had
is that the very
discussions
people who are responsible for seeking that are the people who will receive it. The people who receive the notification about employer obligation and so on is the CE supervisor.
Well, it's the board. It's the board, Deputy, to be clear.
But the boards in large numbers of CE schemes are very small number of people, and the department knows this governance issue is there.
Listen, Deputy, there's nothing I can do about the law. I'm sorry. The law is that they are the employer.
The department used the law to absolve itself of
Deputy, I have to say I disagree with that. I'm obliged to apply the governance standards of the civil and public service.
One last question.
And as a accounting officer, to be fair, I'm obliged to follow these. And if I didn't apply them,
I do accept. But
so
Mr. McCall, do you also accept that many CE schemes, for example, the Meals on Wheels, a very simple one. Your department should not be providing the funding for that service. That should be provided by the HSE. It's a resource of people who are to keep them out of hospital that we apply. Why are we directly funding Meals on Wheels services through a job activation measure? Why is that not provided by HSE? Why are you not going to the department and saying, why is that being funded by it's to do with the funding of this department,
I'll answer
Minister.
that very, very quickly, Chair. I mean, the idea, as we said at the beginning of the community employment schemes, is to give people who are very distant from the labour market occupational activity serving their local community. Meals on Wheels is a service that serves the local community. I think that you could argue both ways. You can argue that it is a good thing for a community employment scheme to be involved in. There's a lot of things community employment...
We don't have catering staff in hospitals on CE schemes.
But what I'd say, Deputy, there are a lot of things that CE schemes do that other service providers in both private and the public sector do. If they were exclusively set up on a kind of a formal employment basis, there would be question marks about whether the people who are on CE schemes would satisfy the recruitment requirements of those, because there are certain standards. What we're trying to do is give an opportunity to people who are very distant from the labour market to get occupational activity that if they applied for a job in the HSE, they probably wouldn't get.
Accepted.